Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is June 13th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope everyone out there is doing well. So a couple stories we're going to talk about today is the news that broke this morning and was on the news all day, and I imagine it will be part of the news for probably the remainder of this week. Obviously, we're at the end of the week, but we're still probably going to see this over the weekend, and this may even continue into next week. Hopefully it doesn't, and of course I'm talking about the attacks on two tankers in the Gulf of Oman. Now, of course, the United States is already blaming the Iranians, as is the United Kingdom, and as is Saudi Arabia. So we're going to get to that in a little bit, but I do want to follow up on our discussion yesterday in regards to opposition research and the president's comments to ABC News' George Stephanopoulos, because we still have the liberal mainstream media hyperbolic about his statements. Again, I am not happy with the statements that the president made in regards to listening or taking information from foreign actors, entities, governments, companies, anything of the like. I mean, the president should have been a little quicker on the gun there, on the draw there, to realize that he has just been tortured for the past 2 years of his administration by the special counsel that just slowed down his political agenda, that just caused so many hiccups and so much uncertainty and divisiveness in this country. Yet there he was answering George Stephanopoulos' question. Yeah, I would listen. I mean, there's no crime in listening, and maybe I would turn it over to the FBI, but I would listen. So I'm not pleased with this, because he should have been, again, quicker on the draw to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Of course, I'm going to turn it over to the FBI. We don't have that. We don't do that. Of course, you got to look at it from the other side, too, because we talk about this all the time here as well, that the United States meddles all over the world. So this is no surprise. The problem is, of course, if you take information from a foreign actor, what does that mean? Is it just a gift? Is it just a freebie? Is it just charity? Or do you now owe them something? Is it a quid pro quo? Because especially when you're talking politics, and now here you're talking the highest office, not only in this country, but in the world, the presidency of the United States of America. If somebody gives you information, a foreign actor gives you information that helps you defeat your political opponent and you become the president of the United States, well, a lot of people are going to have some very commonsensical questions. Well, do they own you? What type of favor are you going to give them in return? Because one would think, naturally, that that's how the world works, to quote the president. So, I mean, you couldn't be surprised to have people who are skeptical or cynical, if you will, questioning the president, whoever he or she may be, who took information from a foreign entity that led to them becoming the president of the United States, to ask some basic questions. What do you owe them? What really did they do for you? Was that all they did? How long have you been in bed with them? What other information do they have? What information do they have on you? Are they potentially blackmailing you with something? These are serious questions. As citizens of a constitutional republic, we need to know these answers. Now, from what we understand from the Mueller report, there was no collusion, there was no conspiracy. The argument on obstruction of justice is still up in the air. Of course, we know, even from the mouth of Attorney General Bill Barr, that the president was not exonerated. We know from the mouth of Bob Mueller himself just a couple of weeks ago, he said, look, we knew from the outset that we weren't going to pursue indictments or charges against the president because of the precedent that exists within the Department of Justice, that we do not indict a sitting president. So that was sort of a punt, if you will, if one wants to interpret it as such, to Congress. Now this is in your court. You have to do something about this, perhaps. Of course, that's how the left is spinning this. Of course, the right is defending Donald Trump. The Mueller report is done. It's over. It's finite. No collusion, no conspiracy, no obstruction of justice. This has been a witch hunt. They toe the line that the president has been putting out there. And of course, I support the president on this. I mean, that was an obstruction. I think it was a witch hunt at the end of the day, from a lot of the things from the genesis of the report. Now, did the president act in the best manner possible during the entirety of that investigation? Probably not. But guess what? Again, I have to pretty much paraphrase Bill Barr during his testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee that said, hey, listen, I'm not going to charge the president, but guess what? If you think that there was a problem with how this president conducted himself during the course of this investigation that, again, took 2 years, then you know what you can do, America. You can vote him out. That's the process. I think that's reasonable. I think that's fair. Now, the interesting thing that the president, again, pointed to, he was pointing to other bad behavior, not necessarily in the interview with George Stephanopoulos, but today in some tweets, he was coming out and saying, well, you know what, I talked to the Queen of England, I talked to the Prince of Wales, I talked to leader after leader, foreign, I guess what he's getting to is he's talking with foreign leaders and foreign entities all the time. Should he call the FBI there? Well, of course, that's a ridiculous argument because it's his job to talk to foreign leaders, to negotiate and to discuss foreign policy, how each country can maybe assist each other in various avenues. That's the job. That's the president being cute, if you will. I mean, he put his foot in his mouth on that statement that he made to George Stephanopoulos. I mean, it was a slam dunk. He inflicts so much attention on himself that's unneeded, and it just causes more divisiveness. This does not serve him well at all to make these types of statements. I don't know if he does it consciously, subconsciously. I have no idea. But nevertheless, this is par for the course. We shouldn't be surprised by this. It doesn't mean that it's justified. It doesn't mean that it's excusable, because it is not excusable in my opinion. You do not take that type of information. Now, is there probably some truth in what the president said as far as, well, this is how the world works? I mean, we got a very dirty world here. We talk about it, unfortunately, here every day, especially when you're talking about the world of politics, and especially when you're talking about the Oval Office. I mean, it doesn't get much more powerful than that, ladies and gentlemen. So for somebody to say, hey, listen, hey, Joe, come here. Listen, wait, what do you want? Come here. I got some information for you. People are going to listen. That's what's likely going to happen. Now, the question is, does that individual end up turning it over to the FBI? And that becomes the question. So you kind of understand the way the world works. And, of course, you're on the mainstream media. You turn on CNN or MSNBC. Oh, of course, nobody would do that. Of course, the first thing anybody would do would turn it over to the FBI. I doubt that. Some people would, but I think they're the exception. They're not the rule. So, I mean, you can point to a few characters about here and there, and it all depends on the situation as to whether or not it was something that was, quote-unquote, voluntarily offered to a candidate, or if it was something that the candidate knew was stolen. So there is a little bit of a distinction there. If you know something is stolen and it's provided to you for some sort of dirt on a political opponent, well, that's a different story. Maybe that you directly take to the FBI or to some sort of authority. But if it's just, hey, I got some information, maybe you do listen, that could more or less be the way of the world. But again, the president should have acted a little bit better, should have made a smarter statement on this. And of course, he again points to other wrong behavior. So 2 wrongs do not make a right, Mr. President. I'm sure you tell your children this. Maybe you don't, but nevertheless, that's sort of the way that it works. 2 wrongs don't make a right. So pointing to other behavior as an excuse or justification isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. Of course, we talked here yesterday that the mainstream media has, convenient political amnesia, because that's exactly what Hillary Clinton did. That was probably the genesis of this whole Steele dossier and in the subsequent investigation into the Trump campaign, perhaps other campaigns, and the Donald Trump administration. So you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. But again, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And the president also made reference to some other senators and congressmen who thought they were getting information on political opponents from foreign actors. So again, the mainstream media should do a better job at calling a spade a spade. And the president should do a better job of not sticking his foot in his mouth in making those types of statements. I mean, on one hand, I guess you can argue, say, well, it's somewhat transparent. At least he's being honest. Well, if he's honest that he's going to commit a crime, that's really not something we need to hear as the American people. We have enough problems as it is that aren't being addressed. And now we have to deal with this, the more shenanigans. I mean, completely, this is taking up major airtime on CNN and MSNBC. And of course, you have on Fox News that they're defending Trump for the most part. You have some people questioning some things, sidelining it a little bit, because this was not the smartest statement that the president could have and should have made. Okay, so that's that. We'll see how this carries over. I'm sure this will be on the Sunday morning circuit. And before we get to the Iranian quote-unquote incident, the oil tanker incident, other news out today, Sarah Sanders Huckabee, the press secretary, is stepping down at the end of the month. She will be leaving. It's my understanding that she has not given a press conference for about 90 days. So what has she been doing? I mean, I'm sure she's answering emails and phone calls and doing a whole bunch of press releases. But nevertheless, it is customary to have a press secretary field questions pretty much on a daily basis from the White House press corps to answer questions on a multitude of issues. That sort of lends itself to the credibility of the White House, and it allows America to understand what the president is thinking, what his administration is thinking and wants to do. It's that avenue between, that's how our republic is supposed to work. There's supposed to be transparency. So on some issues, you can say that the Trump administration has been transparent. They've released a whole bunch of documents to the Mueller investigation. The president comes out and gives a lot of impromptu discussions with the media. Now, of course, I'm sure the president thinks he is the best PR man to represent himself. That may very well be true, but this is not the Trump organization. This is the United States of America. You are the president of the United States, no longer the president of Trump organization. So there are different things that you sort of have to abide by. And this gets me. Obviously, this is the Capitol News, okay? So the freedom of the press and the right of the citizenry to understand what the president is thinking and to sort of have that relationship and open dialogue between the press secretary and the press corps is very important, okay? It's one thing to hear a whole bunch of things from the president. It's another thing to have that back and forth daily dialogue with the press secretary on behalf of the president and the American people through the press corps. We haven't had a press conference in 90 days, and of course they get contentious, and it's very difficult for Sarah Sanders because, I mean, you have to feel for her because you have a president who exaggerates, he's hyperbolic, he misleads, and he does lie. So that puts poor Sarah in a bad situation to, well, what do? I like this job. I like being in the White House. I'm sure it's very exciting. You meet a lot of interesting people. It's fast-paced. I mean, it's one hell of an opportunity of a lifetime. I mean, do I go to bat for my boss, the president, and sort of toe the line and continue with the exaggerations and the hyperbole and the misleading statements and the lies, et cetera, or do I get up there and just, really counteract my boss, the president, and tell the truth on some of these things? And that's ridiculous that I even have to say this, but unfortunately that is the truth in many instances. So she's stepping down. We wish the best for her and everything like that. But she is stepping aside at the end of the month. Who's going to replace her, we do not know. Maybe the president himself, because we haven't had press conferences anyway, so what do you need a press secretary for? So I'll keep you posted on that as we make some updates on there. Now, moving to the war Drums Playeth. I mean, this is something we talked about a few weeks ago in May, because there were a couple other oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz that were attacked. And now 2 more have been attacked earlier this morning. And of course, the United States was quick to say that it was the Iranians. I don't know about you folks, but this is making, a little nervous here. Where are we going with this? I told you when the United States made the decision last month to move the USS Abraham Lincoln, I believe it was, the carrier strike force to the Strait of Hormuz, into that area with, fighter jets, the whole 9 yards. When you do that, you're setting yourself up for something to happen. There's more bodies in the way. There's more things that can go wrong. It doesn't mean it was the wrong move by the administration to make, but it's just something that you have to weigh, and obviously the president was, I'm sure, well aware of that. And nevertheless, he made the decision to move the USS Abraham Lincoln to that area to, I guess, thwart or deter other threats, other attacks. Well, apparently it didn't work, because regardless of who it was, there was an attack. 2 vessels, 1 Japanese vessel, 1 Norwegian vessel. Damage, yes. Extreme damage, no. The tankers didn't sink. I don't believe there was any major oil spill or any other chemical spill. I'm sure there was some spillage or leakage into the Gulf of Oman. But nevertheless, we're not overly concerned with any type of environmental issue over there. It's only when it happens here is it an environmental crisis. So we have the United States beating the war drum. We're in the area. We have the United States, we have the United Kingdom, and we have Saudi Arabia all claiming that the Iranians are responsible for this. Of course, the Iranians are denying this. In the afternoon press conference from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He came out and, of course, made these charges. Allow me to read some of his statement to you. Now, at the time, he offered no concrete evidence to back up the assertion that it was the Iranians. Quote, "It is the assessment of the United States government that the Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible for the attacks that occurred in the Gulf of Oman today. This assessment is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, and the fact that no proxy group operating in the area has the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication. 2 oil tankers were attacked on Thursday and left adrift in the Gulf of Oman. The attack drove up oil prices and stoked fears of a new confrontation between Iran and the United States." The White House said President Donald Trump had been briefed. Washington accused Tehran of being behind a similar attack on May 12th, 1 month ago, on 4 tankers in the same area. My apologies, 4 tankers, a vital shipping route through which much of the world's oil passes. So you have Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, out there offering no concrete evidence at the time, but just saying based off of intelligence, and that may very well be true, based off of the sophistication, this, that, and the other. And this, of course, is at an interesting time, because it was only a week or so ago you had the President of the United States over in Japan meeting with Prime Minister Abe, trying to discuss many issues, probably trying to prepare a little bit for the upcoming G20 meeting over in Japan later this month, talking about some trade issues and more negotiations with Japan, trying to get a trade deal negotiated there between the United States and the Japanese. But Prime Minister Abe of Japan was also in Iran today, pretty much on behalf, or at least partially on behalf of the United States, to play a diplomatic role with the leaders of the Iranian regime to settle or de-escalate a lot of these tensions between Washington, D.C. and Tehran. Now, of course, if this is true that it was the Iranians who attacked these 2 vessels, then I guess you can throw that one in the scrap heap. Now, again, of course, the Iranians are denying this. The question remains, who is ultimately responsible? Now, later this evening, we had actual film footage from the Department of Defense saying that we have footage of an Iranian vessel, a small boat, going up to one of these vessels after it had already been attacked to remove what appears to be some sort of mine that did not explode. Now, the ironic thing is, again, this happened after the explosion, not before. And we also had the U.S. Navy in the area. We had drones flying around. We had other airplanes flying around. And yet somehow the Iranians, if that's who we're led to believe who it was able to get in there, take down the mine from the hull of the vessel, and get out of there. They were able to skedaddle. They could get out of there. They were able to get away from United States forces. They were able to dodge the U.S. Navy. They were able to dodge the drones and any other type of aerial vehicle we were flying around at the time. Very interesting, isn't it? Very sophisticated, perhaps. Allow me to read another article here shortly, or briefly here to you. The United States military on Thursday released a video that it says shows an Iranian Navy boat removing an unexploded mine attached to the hull of the Japanese-owned chemical tanker Kokura Courageous, one of the 2 tankers attacked in the Gulf of Oman. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Thursday blamed Iran for attacking the Kokura Courageous and another ship, Norwegian-owned Front Altair, saying the assessment was based on intelligence. Later Thursday night, U.S. Central Command released the video, which you can find pretty much on anywhere, which it says shows Iranian sailors removing a mine from the Kokura Courageous's hull. In the video, a smaller boat is shown coming up to the side of the Japanese-owned tanker. An individual stands up on the bow of the boat and can be seen removing an object from the tanker's hull. The U.S. says the object is likely an unexploded mine. Now, the reason the Iranians, or whoever this is, went to go back to take it is because if U.S. authorities found that mine, they would probably know who left it. There would be some sort of intelligence on it as to who made it, based off of the materials of which it was combined, where the materials were mined from, manufactured, this, that, and the other, there would be basically a forensic fingerprint that would point to the culprit. So that is why they risk life and limb, I guess, to sail between the U.S. Navy, drones, and the like. The attack comes at a time of high tensions between the U.S. and Iran and could provide more fodder for Iran hawks within the administration, whose recent Iran saber-rattling has frustrated President Donald Trump. One of them, National Security Advisor John Bolton, our buddy, announced last month that the Pentagon was deploying the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group and a bomber task force to the Middle East in response to a, quote, number of troubling and escalatory indications and warnings from Iran. Now, one of the officials, this is in relation to the video, said the video came from a U.S. military aircraft that was recording as it flew overhead. The boat made the move even after the destroyer USS Bainbridge, as well as a U.S. drone and P-8 aircraft, had been on the scene for hours. Unbelievable. U.S. defense officials believe that the Iranians were seeking to recover evidence of their involvement in the attack, and the article continues. That was a CNN article. Has some pictures. It provides the video. You can check that out. Again, you can probably find it anywhere now since it is available. I'm sure it will be plastered all over the place throughout the entirety of tomorrow's news cycle. Again, this is the war drums playeth. I mean, this is what we're in the midst of. I mean, do you want World War III? Because this is what this is going to be. I mean, now you have to ask some commonsensical questions. If it was, in fact, the Iranians, why would they do this? Why would they risk going to war with the United States and its allies? Why would they do it? I mean, it would not be an easy fight for the United States, but I mean, Iran at the end of the day would most likely get decimated. Because, I mean, I honestly don't believe that the president, Donald Trump, wants to go to war in Iran. But if you continue to have these types of escalations, if you continue to cut off the world's oil supply or a large supply thereof, I mean, there's going to be ramifications. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So the United States, in all likelihood, would decimate the Iranians. Would it be easy? No, it would not be easy. But I think we have the technology, we have the weaponry, we have the forces. But I pray that we do not end up in another war, because this will basically be World War III. I mean, you know, Iraq was one thing, Afghanistan was another. Afghanistan, you're going after some terrorists and some Taliban. Of course, we're still going after them 18 years later, and it's my understanding that the Taliban has even more power today than it did 18 years ago, so go figure on that one. Iraq, there were no weapons of mass destruction. Those forces, they surrendered before we even got there. I mean, we took Baghdad in 3 weeks. You're not going to take Tehran in 3 weeks unless you use some really, really powerful weapons, and you can guess what I'm talking about. And I hope we don't. I hope we don't, because the loss of life, the refugees, I mean, the economic damage, the loss of life, I mean, we don't need it. I don't know who wants this. Maybe crazy John Bolton. He might want it. Maybe Mike Pompeo wants it. Maybe the Saudi Arabians want us to go over there and do their fighting for them because they don't like the Iranians and the Iranians don't like the Saudis. I mean, you go after Iran, you're going to get Syria involved, you're probably going to get China involved, you're probably going to get Russia involved. I mean, you want World War III? I don't want it. Who's going? You? Me? I'm not going. I'm not fighting for this crap. I mean, this is unbelievable. Except it isn't unbelievable. This is par for the course. This is something we discussed here at the Capitol News last month when those attacks occurred. We said, we better be careful here because, you know, we talk all the time on the economic podcast about the 4 things that really affect the price of oil. That's supply and demand. It's the value of the dollar, and it's geopolitical risk. Well, we have a huge geopolitical risk right here. It was just yesterday. I said, let's hope that there's some calm. Let's hope that there's enough nonsense. Let's just put it aside for a day. Well, couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Jinxed us. I'm sorry. But here we stand on the brink of another war that we cannot afford. I don't even know if we really have enough people. I mean, where are they going to come from? I mean, at the end of the day, it still comes down to that question. Why would Iran do this? How is it in their interest to do this? If it's just going to antagonize the United States, to escalate, to put on more economic pressure on that country, which is not good for the Iranians, why would they want that? Why would they actually want any possibility of war? I don't think that they would. So, I mean, I really hope that this is not what would be considered a false flag attack. But this would almost be par for the course, unfortunately, for the United States getting involved militarily. This is what we do. So we have to look out for this, because I tell you what, we go to war, there is profit in war. It's in the book. It's in our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing. In the era of too big to fail, it pays to be a cynic. We talk about this at brief, but nevertheless, the point, I think, was profound and makes sense throughout the entirety of the chapter, where we talk about war. What is it good for? We'll tell you. And it's profits. The banks will make money because somebody's got to fund it. Energy companies will make money because they got to fund it. I mean, this is ridiculous. You would think that the stock market would sell off today. It didn't. It rallied. Oil prices rallied. That you can somewhat understand because of the supply-demand functions and a geopolitical risk. Okay, so that's 3 of the 4 right there, blasted. Okay, that somewhat makes sense. But the stock market rallied. Why? Because war is profitable, unfortunately. And when you have oil spiking, you have the oil companies, their share prices rising. And when you have the potential for war and it needing finance, guess who does well? The banks, the financial sector does well. So there you go. You got the big banks going up and you got big oil going up. So much for draining the swamp. I mean, this is ridiculous. I pray to God, and I hope you're praying with me, that we do not go to war. We cannot afford it. We can't afford the loss of life. We shouldn't want the loss of life on this side and on the other side. This is ridiculous. This is getting really scary. I mean, I'm at a loss for words, because I was really hoping that we could put this aside, that this might be enough. Okay, they got the 4 tankers last month. All right, we flexed our muscles. We send a task force, a carrier strike force over there. All right, we're flexing our muscles. Don't mess with us, blah, blah, blah. Now 2 more have been hit. So this is not going away anytime soon. I mean, who's to say this does not escalate over the course of the coming week? Hopefully, again, that it does not. But this is something that we have to pay attention to, because it has implications and ramifications the world over. So we're going to keep our eyes on this. We're going to pay attention. Any updates, I'm obviously going to be here to keep everybody abreast of what's going on, to do my best. But you have to ask some simple questions. Who benefits? Cui bono? I mean, it's one of the oldest questions, because there's always a motive. There's always somebody who benefits. I don't really see how the Iranians benefit from this, but I can see how some American companies can. And I don't like sounding like this as if I'm unpatriotic, because that's far from it. I'm a very patriotic person. I mean, I'm trying to stand up for the values of this country that have been stripped away from us. Stripped away from us. And that actually leads me to something, because I wanted to kick off with this, because I saw an interesting thing on social media today. Let me pull this up on my phone. Bear with me for 1 second, because it was an interesting quote, an interesting, if you will, picture here. And here's what it says. It says, "Did you know we now live in a nation where doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, universities destroy knowledge, government destroys freedom, the press destroys information, religion destroys morals, and our banks destroy the economy." Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Kreitis. Godspeed.